The Sapphire Bay Resort stretched along 2 miles of pristine Caribbean coastline, its white buildings cascading down to turquoise water. I'd purchased the property 6 years ago when it was a struggling 3-star hotel, invested $12 million in renovations, and transformed it into a 5-star destination that anchored my 11-property resort chain. My family's annual reunion was being held here this year. 40 relatives gathering for a long weekend, and not one of them knew they were staying at my resort. "Welcome to Sapphire Bay," the valet said warmly, reaching for my luggage from my 10-year-old Honda. His name tag read Marcus, and I recognized him from the staff photos my regional manager sent monthly. Checking in. Yes, under the Summers family reunion block. His eyebrows rose slightly. "Miss Summers? I'll have your bag sent directly to—" "Just follow the standard reunion room assignments, please," I interrupted gently. "I'm a guest today." "Of course." He looked confused but handed me a claim ticket. The lobby was all marble and ocean views, with the signature blue glass chandelier I'd commissioned from a Miami artist. My cousin Ashley held court near the check-in desk, directing family members with a clipboard and an air of authority. "Kate." He waved me over. "You're finally here. We were worried you wouldn't make it." "Flight was delayed," I said, hugging her briefly. "Well, you're just in time. I've got everyone's room assignments organized. We've been upgraded. The resort gave us an amazing deal on suites for the whole family." She beamed. "Oceanfront, balconies, the works." "That's great. Your room is ready too. Let me just check." She consulted her clipboard. What?" "So, the suite upgrades were for couples and families. Since you're single, they kept you in a standard room. But it's still nice. Poolside view." I waited. "It's just that everyone else is in the North Tower with ocean views and you're in the South Building. But honestly, Kate, you'll probably be so busy with family activities you won't even notice." My cousin Jessica appeared, designer sunglasses perched on her head. "Did you tell her about the rooms?" "Just explaining the arrangement," Ashley said. Jessica nodded sympathetically. "It's actually better this way. The South Building is quieter. More your speed, you know? Less chaotic than being with all the couples and their kids." "High speed," I repeated. "You know what I mean. You're always so independent. Content with less." She gestured at my simple sundress and carry-on bag. "This way you won't feel out of place when everyone else is posting photos from their fancy suites." I checked in with the front desk agent who clearly knew who I was but followed my earlier instruction to treat me like any other guest. She handed me a key card to room 142, a ground floor standard with a view of the resort's smaller pool, far from the luxury accommodations in the North Tower. My phone buzzed as I headed to my room. A text from Ashley in the family group chat. "Everyone's upgraded to suites except Kate. She's in a standard room but says she doesn't mind. So generous of her to understand." Smiling face with smiling eyes. Replies flooded in. "That's our Kate, always so easygoing. At least she gets a poolside view. Better than nothing else." I stood in the hallway outside room 142, looking at the text thread. My family celebrating their upgraded suites at my resort, while I'd been assigned the cheapest room in the building. I opened the door to find a perfectly adequate standard room, crisp white linens, basic furniture, a small bathroom. Through the window I could see the secondary pool where families with small children played. It was nice. It was fine. It was nowhere near the oceanfront suites where my family was unpacking in luxury I'd personally designed. I pulled out my phone and called the front desk. "This is Kate Summers. I need to speak with the regional manager immediately." "Miss Summers?" "Of course. I'll connect you with Mr. Patterson right away." Derek Patterson answered on the first ring. "Miss Summers, I didn't realize you were on property today. Is everything all right? I'm here for a family reunion. The Summers family block. Do you have the reservation details?" "One moment." I heard typing. "Yes, we have 40 guests under that block. Premium suite upgrades for most of the party, some standard rooms." He paused. "Oh. They assigned you to room 142. "They did. That's our most basic accommodation." "Who approved that room assignment for the owner?" "My family doesn't know I own the resort, Derek. They think they got a generous upgrade deal. And they decided I didn't qualify for a suite because I'm single." Silence on the other end. "Derek, I need you to do something for me." "Anything." Reverse all the suite upgrades. Move my family back to standard rooms. Cancel the resort credits, the complimentary breakfast and the spa discounts. Return them to the standard reunion package rate. You want me to downgrade your entire family? Immediately. Miss Summers, that's going to cause complaints. They'll demand to speak with management. I'm counting on it. 20 minutes later, I was unpacking my carry-on when my phone exploded with notifications. Ashley, Kate, did you see? They're moving us out of the suites. Some kind of computer error. Jessica, this is ridiculous. We already unpacked. They're saying we have to move to standard rooms. My Uncle Tom, the manager says there's no resort credits anymore either. What kind of place is this? Aunt Linda, I'm going to the front desk to complain. This is unacceptable service. I smiled and headed to the lobby. The scene was exactly what I'd expected. 15 angry family members crowded around the front desk, voices overlapping as they demanded explanations. Ashley waved her clipboard like a weapon. Jessica was filming on her phone, probably planning to post a scathing review. This is outrageous, Aunt Linda declared. We had confirmed upgrades. Oceanfront suites. Now you're saying we have to move to smaller rooms. The front desk agent maintained professional composure. I apologize for the confusion, but there was an error in the original booking. The suite upgrades and resort credits weren't actually approved. I have the confirmation email. Ashley thrust her phone forward. It says right here we're getting the premium experience. I understand, ma'am, but I want to speak to the manager, Uncle Tom interrupted. This is unacceptable. We're a party of 40. We deserve better treatment. I'll get the regional manager, the agent said, already reaching for her phone. I stood at the back of the group watching the chaos unfold. My cousin Ryan spotted me. Kate, can you believe this? They're downgrading everyone. Everyone? I asked innocently. Well, not you, obviously. You're already in a standard room. He said it without malice, just stating what he thought was obvious. But the rest of us are being moved from luxury suites to regular rooms. It's crazy. Derek Patterson emerged from the executive offices, immaculate in his resort manager suit. His eyes found mine immediately, a question in them. I gave him the slightest nod. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice cutting through the complaints. I apologize for the confusion regarding your room assignments. Confusion? Jessica snapped. This is incompetence. We were promised upgrades. I understand your frustration. However, I need to clarify something about this situation. He pulled out his tablet. The Summers family reunion block was booked at our standard group rate. The suite upgrades you received were unauthorized. Unauthorized by who? Ashley demanded. By the property owner. Derek's gaze swept across my family. Miss Summers specifically requested that all upgrades be revoked. The lobby went silent. Miss Summers. Aunt Linda's voice was sharp. Kate had nothing to do with our booking. Ashley arranged everything. Not Kate, Derek said. Catherine Summers. The owner of Sapphire Bay Resort and the entire Sapphire Collection resort chain. You could have heard a pin drop. Ashley's clipboard clattered to the marble floor. Kate doesn't, she couldn't. She works in hotel management. She owns hotel management, Derek corrected. 11 properties across the Caribbean and Central America. Sapphire Bay is the flagship. Jessica's phone was still recording, capturing every stunned face. That's impossible, Uncle Tom said weakly. Kate drives a Honda. She dresses like she shops at outlet malls. I do shop at outlet malls, I said, stepping forward from the back of the group. And my Honda runs perfectly well. Neither of those things has any bearing on my net worth. The crowd parted as I walked toward Derek. Miss Summers, he said formally. I've executed your instructions. All room assignments have been returned to the standard group rate. Should I proceed with the downgrades? Every eye was on me. Ashley found her voice. Kate, you own this resort? I purchased it 6 years ago. Invested $12 million in renovations. Built the North Tower you were all just complaining about being moved out of. But you never said anything. You let us book here, let us think we were getting some special deal. You did get a special deal, I interrupted. I approved a 40% discount on your group rate because you're family. The upgrades you received? Those were complimentary because I wanted you to enjoy the resort. Until I saw the room assignments. Jessica lowered her phone slowly. The room assignments? I was given a standard room. Ground floor poolside. The cheapest accommodation we offer. I looked at Ashley. You texted the family chat saying I didn't mind being in a lesser room because I'm generous and easygoing. Ashley's face went red. You decided I didn't qualify for an upgrade because I'm single. Because I'm different. Because you assumed I couldn't afford better anyway. We didn't mean it like that, Jessica protested. How did you mean it then? I asked quietly. When you said the standard room was more my speed? When you suggested I'd feel out of place in the luxury suites? When you told everyone I was content with less? Silence. I own this resort, I continued. I designed those suites you were so excited about. I selected every piece of furniture, every art piece, every amenity. I built the spa where you booked treatments and the restaurant where you made reservations. And you assigned me to the worst room in the building because you decided I wasn't good enough for better. Aunt Linda sank into a nearby chair. Kate, we didn't know. You didn't ask. You made assumptions based on my car and my clothes and my marital status. You decided I was less successful, less important, less deserving. Ryan stepped forward. So you're punishing us by taking away the upgrades. I'm giving you what you booked, I corrected. Standard rooms at a discounted group rate. Which is still generous considering you tried to exclude me from the luxury accommodations at my own resort. Derek cleared his throat. Miss Summers, should I proceed with reassigning rooms? I looked at my family, 40 faces showing various degrees of shame, confusion, and residual entitlement. Part of me wanted to let them sit in their embarrassment, let them experience the standard rooms they deemed good enough for me. But they were still family. No, I said finally. Keep the suite upgrades. Restore the resort credits and the breakfast. They can stay in the North Tower. Relief flooded several faces. But, I continued, I'm moving to the presidential suite. The one in the private tower that's not available for standard bookings. With the ocean views, private infinity pool and dedicated concierge service. The suite that costs $12,000 per night. $12,000, Ashley choked. I am still the owner, I said. And I deserve the best accommodations at my own property. Derek, have my things moved immediately. With pleasure, Miss Summers. As Derek made arrangements on his tablet, I turned back to my family. You're welcome to enjoy your suites. Enjoy the resort, the amenities, the vacation. But from now on you include me. Not because I own the place, but because I'm family and I deserve the same respect you give each other. Uncle Tom found his voice. Kate, we're sorry. We should have. You should have treated me better regardless of what you thought my bank account looked like, I finished. But yes, you should have. Ashley picked up her clipboard with shaking hands. Can we start over? Can you tell us about your business? Really tell us. I considered. The presidential suite was probably ready by now. I could retreat there, enjoy my private pool and ocean views, let them wonder about the empire I'd built. But they were asking. Finally asking. This evening, I said. Come to my suite at 7. I'll order dinner from our executive chef, the one I recruited from a Michelin-starred restaurant in Miami, and tell you everything. Your suite? Jessica asked hesitantly. The presidential suite, yes. There's room for 40 on the terrace. Bring everyone. It's time you understood who I am. That evening, my family gathered on the sprawling terrace of the presidential suite. The sun set over the Caribbean, painting the sky in impossible colors. My private chef served courses I'd personally approved, wine from my resort's premium cellar. And I told them everything. About buying my first struggling hotel at 28 with money I'd saved from a tech job. About renovating it, turning it profitable, selling it for triple my investment. About building a portfolio of 11 properties across 6 years. About creating the Sapphire Collection brand that was now synonymous with luxury Caribbean hospitality. They listened. Actually listened without interruption or dismissal. You did all this by yourself? My cousin Ryan asked, awed. With excellent teams at each property, I said. But yes, the vision and capital were mine. Ashley set down her wine glass carefully. And we put you in room 142. You did. I'm so sorry, Kate. I thought I was being practical. I thought you wouldn't care about the room quality because you never seem to care about appearances. I don't care about appearances, I agreed. But I care about being valued. About being included. About my family seeing me as worthy of the same treatment they give each other. We see you now, Aunt Linda said quietly. And Kate, we're proud of you. We should have been proud all along. The evening continued with questions about my business, my properties, my plans for expansion. They wanted to know everything, and for the first time I believed they genuinely cared about the answers. Later, after everyone left, I stood alone on my terrace overlooking the resort I'd built. The North Tower lights glowed where my family slept in their complimentary suites. The resort hummed with satisfied guests enjoying amenities I'd created. My phone buzzed. A text from Ashley to the family group chat. Thanks to Kate for an incredible evening. I'm sorry for how we treated her. She deserves every success she's built. Red heart. Replies flooded in, apologies and admiration mixing together. I smiled and looked out at the Caribbean night. They finally saw me. The successful businesswoman. The resort owner. The woman who'd built an empire while they'd assumed she was barely getting by. But more than that, the family member who'd chosen grace over revenge, even when she had every right to cancel their entire vacation. I'd revealed my success on my terms at my resort with my grace. And that was worth more than any presidential suite.
My mother threw a cake in my face, a full chocolate buttercream still cold from the bakery box I'd carried in just 40 minutes earlier. It hit square between my eyes. For a split second, there was laughter. Real laughter from someone. Then silence, thick and stunned. Cream dripped down my nose onto my blouse and pooled on the floor. No one moved. No one gasped. I looked around, hoping someone would say something that it had gone too far, but my father looked away, and my sister wiped a fake tear from the corner of her eye. I picked up my purse, still sticky from frosting, and walked out of my parents' dining room. No one followed. I don't know why the silence hurt more than the cake. Maybe because I brought it. Maybe because I'd spent $48.75 on it that morning from a little shop near my new place, the one Mom said she liked. Maybe because I thought it was the only thing I could bring that might count as peace. The frosting had soaked into the collar of my shirt by the time I reached my car. I didn't cry. Not yet. I turned the ignition with shaking hands and backed out of the driveway like a fugitive. The cake was still on my skin. Sugar cream, chocolate humiliation. It wasn't the first time they'd made me feel like I didn't belong. It was just the first time they'd used dessert to drive the point home. Back at my apartment, I locked the door, leaned against it, and slid down to the floor. The overhead lights were too harsh. I turned them off. In the dark, the frosting started to dry, pulling at the corners of my mouth. I still hadn't wiped it off. My shoes left chocolate prints on the tile. I didn't care. At some point, I made it to the bathroom and stared into the mirror. I looked ridiculous. My mother's daughter, the successful accountant, the girl with a $300,000 condo and no mortgage. The one who wasn't invited to Thanksgiving last year because Emma deserved the focus. Now the girl with cake in her face. I peeled off the blouse, dropped it in the sink, and watched the frosting melt under warm water. I didn't bother with the rest. I sat on the floor in an old college t-shirt and opened the kitchen cabinet. Empty. I'd forgotten to go shopping this week, or last. Didn't matter. Eventually, I pulled down the box I kept above the fridge. It was one of the last things I'd brought from my old apartment, just a shoebox. Inside, a wrinkled receipt from my first paycheck at the firm, a key from my childhood bedroom that no longer fit any lock, and an embroidered cloth handkerchief with my name stitched in crooked thread. Rachel, I made it at summer camp when I was 7. My mother packed it into my suitcase, told me to always keep it close just in case. She said it was for emergencies. It was the only thing in the box that didn't smell like dust. I held it to my face, still sticky with icing, and whispered, "So here we are, Mom. An emergency." I was 8 when I realized my name didn't mean much in our family. It was a Thursday. Emma had just won second place in her school's coloring contest. A sheet of sunflowers, mostly yellow-colored outside the lines. My mother taped it to the refrigerator like it was a museum piece. That same week, I'd come home with a district-level math certificate. I placed it on the kitchen counter. It stayed there for 2 days until Dad used it to balance a wobbly table leg. That's how it started. Quiet omissions, small disappearances, a name left out of introductions, a skipped birthday, a forgotten recital. I wasn't unloved exactly, just unnecessary. I think that's worse. Emma was 3 years younger than me with soft curls and a voice like a songbird. She cried easily and laughed loudly and had the kind of emotional range that made grown-ups melt. I, on the other hand, was quiet, practical, organized. I preferred books to people and memorized the Dewey Decimal System just for fun. At family dinners, Emma always sat between Mom and Dad. I sat at the edge of the table next to Great Aunt Meryl, who smelled like peppermint and never remembered my name. When we both had performances the same weekend, Emma's dance recital and my debate finals, guess which one my parents attended? "We can't be in two places at once, honey," Mom said. "You understand, right?" I did. I always did. At 16, I passed my driver's test on the first try. I came home, excited, waving the little laminated card in my hand. Emma got a car the next year for her birthday, new silver with a bow on top. I got a used bike 2 years prior. When I asked why Dad said Emma needs to get to her cheer practice, that's harder without wheels. As if my part-time job and tutoring sessions didn't count, I stopped asking after that. College came. I worked 2 jobs, ate canned soup, and graduated summa cum laude in accounting. Emma dropped out of her first semester, said she wanted to find herself. Mom helped her move into a loft with a friend, paid 6 months of rent up front. I didn't blame Emma. It wasn't her fault she was the favorite. She didn't ask for it. She just learned how to swim in the current that always pulled me under. There were quiet moments, though, when the truth burned too brightly to ignore. Like the time I showed up to Easter dinner wearing a navy pantsuit after a big promotion and Mom said, "That's a strong look. Emma could never pull that off." She meant it as a compliment, I think. Or the time Emma hosted a Friendsgiving at her apartment and forgot to invite me. "It was more of a college crowd thing," she explained. "I was 28. Still, I kept showing up, bringing wine, offering help, remembering birthdays. I didn't want recognition anymore. I just didn't want to be erased. The worst part wasn't the forgetting. It was the expecting that I'd be there, that I'd understand, that I'd fill in the gap without ever asking for anything back. They never asked if I had enough. They just assumed I'd never ask for more. Back in my apartment, I ran my fingers over the old handkerchief again. Rachel. The stitching had unraveled a little at the corners. I thought of that summer at camp, the way Mom folded my clothes so carefully, the way she wrote notes on napkins back when I was still the only child. Back when she still looked at me like I was enough. I wondered when I disappeared, and who exactly she thought I had become. I stopped trying to be included. Somewhere between college and my second tax season, I learned to make peace with the silence. I poured everything into work spreadsheets, forecasts, retirement plans for people I'd never meet. Numbers were honest. They didn't forget you. They didn't play favorites. I lived in a studio apartment the size of a storage unit. It had 1 window, 3 working outlets, and neighbors who argued through thin walls, but it was mine, and it was cheap enough that I could save half my income. I packed lunches, reused tea bags, and declined every vacation invite. When Emma posted beach selfies in Tulum, I was updating ledgers under fluorescent lights. When my coworkers went to happy hour, I brought tax code to a laundromat. People thought I was driven, focused. The truth was simpler. I didn't have anyone to fall back on. I couldn't afford to coast. 8 years in, I had enough. Between my salary, careful investing, and a modest inheritance from my grandmother, I scraped together $300,000. I bought a 2-bedroom condo in a transitional neighborhood, not trendy but safe with creaky floors and good bones. No mortgage, no cosigner, no debt. It wasn't fancy. The kitchen was stuck in 1992. The walls had textured wallpaper that looked like it had seen a few divorces. But when I turned the key, it clicked, and for once, I didn't feel like I was borrowing space from someone else's life. I painted the walls myself, scrubbed the grout with a toothbrush, watched YouTube videos on electrical wiring. Every blister, every sore muscle felt like a receipt, proof that I'd earned square footage. When I told my parents Mom just said 2 bedrooms, that's a lot of space for one person. I smiled, said nothing. Maybe she didn't mean it as judgment, maybe she did. I still called on Sundays, still sent birthday cards, still brought wine to family dinners even when they forgot I was coming. When I finally invited Emma to see the apartment, she said, "Wow, you really don't have a headboard." Then she laughed as if I'd just told a joke. That was 2 weeks before the call. "Sweetheart," Mom said, syrup in her voice. "Can you come by next Saturday? We're having a little family gathering. Bring one of those chocolate cakes from that bakery near your place. You know the one I like?" I paused mid-paint stroke, the bathroom ceiling still half covered in primer. Is something wrong? Of course not. Just a surprise. Come by, around 4. I should have known. I should have heard it in her voice, the way she pushed sweetness like a spoonful of medicine. But I said yes, picked up the cake, showed up on time. Because even after all this time, I still wanted to believe that doing everything right would finally mean I belonged. The house looked the same from the outside. 2-story colonial white shutters, rose bushes trimmed too neatly. It was the house my grandmother left to Emma and me. We'd let our parents stay in it after she passed. It never felt like a favor until now I parked behind Uncle Greg's pickup. There were more cars than I expected. Aunt Linda's red Buick, Cousin Josh's Jeep. Even Emma's boyfriend Kevin had managed to snag a spot in the driveway. This wasn't a small gathering. I stepped inside the cake, balanced carefully in my hands. "Rachel's here." Mom called, her voice bright and rehearsed. She swooped in, kissed my cheek, and took the cake like I was delivering a prop. Perfect timing. We're just sitting down. The living room was filled with familiar faces, all dressed like it was Thanksgiving. Emma sat on the couch, Kevin's hand resting protectively over hers. My father leaned against the fireplace chatting with Uncle Greg. The air smelled like pot roast and polite tension. "What's going on?" I asked Emma as I passed. She smiled vaguely. "You'll see." That should have been the warning. But I followed everyone to the dining room where Mom had laid out her best china, the kind with gold trim she only used for holidays. The cake I brought was placed in the center like a crown. Dinner passed in staged conversation. Everyone was careful, almost rehearsed. Nobody asked me about my apartment. Nobody asked me about anything. Halfway through mashed potatoes, Mom tapped her spoon against a glass. "I want to thank you all for coming," she said, beaming. "We have some wonderful news." Her eyes sparkled as she looked at Emma. "Our Emma is pregnant," she announced. The room erupted in applause. I clapped too. Despite everything, I was happy for her, maybe even proud. She'd always wanted to be a mom. And Mom continued. "She and Kevin are getting engaged. Wedding planning starts next month." More cheers. Kevin smiled like he'd won something. Emma flushed with well-practiced modesty. I leaned over. "Congratulations," I said to her, and I meant it. But then Mom raised her hand again. "That's not all." The room quieted. A few forks paused mid-air. "As you all know, Rachel recently purchased a beautiful apartment," Mom said, gesturing to me like I was part of a silent auction. "It's a 2-bedroom, very spacious. Perfect location." I nodded slowly, unsure where this was going. "She's single," Mom added with a soft laugh. "No kids, no pets, no obligations." And there it was. Emma lowered her eyes. Kevin stared at his plate. My stomach turned. "Emma and Kevin need a home," Mom said, her voice smoothing into something practiced. "Not some rental downtown. They're starting a family." Then she looked directly at me. "Rachel, sweetheart, this is your chance to show how much you love your sister. I think you should give them your apartment." The words landed like broken glass. A collective inhale passed around the table. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. "You can rent again," she added almost cheerfully. "You don't need all that space." Dad nodded in agreement. Kevin still said nothing. Emma finally looked at me, wide-eyed, pleading, embarrassed. "That's a wonderful idea," Aunt Linda chimed in. "Family helps family." I looked at the cake, the one I bought. My hands were cold. "You're not serious," I said. "Oh, but I am," Mom replied. "Emma needs it more than you." And that's when I stood up. That's when the table began to splinter, not physically, but quietly along fault lines that had always been there, and none of them even flinched. The night after the dinner, I didn't sleep. I stripped out of my clothes, still faintly smelling of pot roast and chocolate frosting, and sat on the floor of my apartment. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there frozen like I was waiting for my body to catch up to what had happened. By morning, I had a plan. I pulled out the shoebox from above my fridge, the one with my old receipts, broken keys, and childhood keepsakes, and found what I was looking for. My grandmother's will. It wasn't a long document, just a few notarized pages. But right there in black ink it said, "The house at 742 Carson Lane shall be transferred equally to my granddaughters, Rachel Monroe and Emma Monroe." Our parents had no legal claim. They had been living there by permission, not by right. At 9:12 a.m., I called a lawyer. Jeremy Blackwell was sharp-eyed mid-50s and efficient. He listened quietly as I explained everything, the house, the apartment, the dinner, the cake. His mouth twitched once, almost a smile. "You want to force the sale?" he asked. "I want options," I said. "I want boundaries." He nodded. "You're well within your rights." We drafted a formal notice. Emma could buy out my half at market value, or the house would be listed and sold. Either way, I was done letting people live in places they hadn't earned. 5 days later, I got a text. "You ungrateful little bitch! How can you do this to your family? You're trying to make your pregnant sister homeless." It didn't stop there. That evening, they came to my door. My mother, my father, Emma, Kevin. They banged, they shouted, they pleaded, then they threatened. I didn't open the door. I pressed record on my phone. 14 minutes and 22 seconds of pure boiling chaos. "After everything we've done for you, you never understood family. We should have left you out of the will." I emailed the recording to Jeremy. He called back the next morning. "This is harassment," he said, "but it's also leverage." A week later, I received a letter from their attorney. They wanted to mediate. The meeting was scheduled for Monday, 10 a.m. at Jeremy's office. I arrived early, dressed in my navy pantsuit, the one Emma once mocked. I didn't care. I sat straight, hands folded, eyes calm. They walked in 10 minutes late. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. Emma looked like she hadn't slept. Kevin scowled. My father looked through me. The lawyers began. Facts, numbers, terms. Their attorney argued that selling the house would cause undue emotional hardship. Jeremy presented the will, the audio recording and screenshots of my mother's Facebook post, the one where she asked people to pray for me. Midway through the meeting, my mother did something unexpected. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small folded cloth, the handkerchief, the same one I had stitched my name into at summer camp, the one she packed for me when I was 7. She placed it gently on the table. "I kept this," she said softly. All these years, I looked at it. The edges were frayed. The thread had faded. "You used to need me," she whispered. I took a breath, then I opened my own folder and removed something else, the silver ring she gave me when I graduated. I placed it next to the handkerchief. "I don't anymore," I said. Silence. The lawyers resumed. Final terms were read aloud. The house would be sold. Profits split. No more discussion. Before we left, I looked at my mother one last time. "You didn't lose a daughter," I said quietly. "You lost your source." Then I stood up and walked out. The house sold faster than expected. It was a seller's market in the old colonial on Carson Lane, with its polished hardwood mature trees and familiar white shutters, went under contract in less than 2 weeks. After closing costs and legal fees, Emma and I each received just over $175,000. I never spoke to any of them again. All communication went through attorneys. When the final check arrived, I didn't even open the envelope. I handed it to my financial advisor and told her, "Just make it grow." According to Jeremy, Emma used her share as a down payment on a small house out in the suburbs. My parents moved in with her and Kevin, a full household now, a baby on the way, a mortgage to carry, and more bedrooms than apologies. I didn't feel anything. Not guilt, not anger, not relief. Just quiet. Back in my apartment, the renovation was nearly done. I'd replaced the carpets with oak flooring, painted every wall, and finally bought a real headboard. The kitchen was new, not luxurious, but efficient and clean. Every improvement was a quiet declaration. I did this. Not for them. For me. One evening, I stood on my small balcony with a glass of wine watching the sky turn the color of old peaches. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an old coworker. Emma had the baby. 7 pounds, 6 ounces. Everyone's doing well. I stared at it for a moment, and then I put my phone face down. I felt nothing. No ache, no curiosity, no pull toward the child I would never meet. He'll grow up hearing stories about me, the selfish aunt who wouldn't give up her apartment, who made his family sell their home. They'll never mention how they treated me for 30 years. They'll leave out the cake, and that's fine. I moved back inside and sat on my sofa, the same old one from my studio apartment, still a little lumpy but familiar. On the shelf beside me was the shoebox. I opened it and took out the embroidered handkerchief I had retrieved it after mediation, folded it carefully, not out of sentiment, but because it belonged in the box with the rest of it. The things I carried, the things I no longer needed. Beside it, I placed the last photo I had of my grandmother. Just the two of us. I must have been 10. She's holding my hand. I'm looking up at her like she's the only solid ground I've ever known. Maybe she knew what was coming. Maybe that's why she split the house equally. One final act of balance in a family that never was. "Thank you," I whispered, touching the photo's edge. And then I closed the box. No message from my mother. No letter from Emma. Not a single word. They had all the space in the world, now a whole house of it, to rewrite the story without me. Let them. Because for once I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I had already walked away. My father handed me a duffel bag and shut the door behind me. It was a Tuesday night in January, the kind where the wind slips past your coat collar and finds your bones. I stood on our porch, 17, pregnant and suddenly homeless. My right hand gripped the strap of a worn duffel bag. My left hand curled instinctively over my stomach, even though it was still flat. My father had just told me in the same tone he used to kill snakes on the farm that I was no longer his daughter. He didn't yell when I told them that would have been easier, I think. Instead, he pushed back from the dinner table, slow and stiff, like something in him cracked. My mother dropped her spoon. Her lips opened, but no words came out. "I'm pregnant," I'd said, voice low but steady. It was meatloaf night. Tuesdays were always meatloaf. I remember the smell more than the taste. Thick gravy, overcooked carrots. The creak of my father's chair, the sound of the world changing in 4 syllables. He didn't ask who the father was. Didn't ask if I was scared. Just stood there, jaw clenched, eyes not even on me. "You're not raising a baby under this roof," he said. Then he walked into the hallway, pulled out the old duffel I used for track meets, and set it by the front door. That was it. No more family, no more home. Just the cold porch and the bag half-zipped with a sweatshirt hanging out. The street lamp flickered. Somewhere down the block, someone's TV was too loud. Life kept going, like mine hadn't just fallen off a cliff. A few months before everything had been different. I'd been floating through my senior year on daydreams. Jake, my boyfriend, then talked about moving to Austin. Starting a life I believed him. Believed in the way he looked at me like I was the only thing in the room that made sense. But the summer after graduation, he changed. His texts slowed. His voice got quieter. One afternoon in October, he told me he had big plans, college, freedom, ambition, and I didn't fit. "It's not you," he said, standing in the park we used to meet in. "I just need to figure myself out." He walked away without looking back. And now, months later, my father did the same. I didn't cry. Not right then. I walked down the steps like my legs still belonged to me and turned left at the corner without thinking. My fingers were numb. My thoughts were quieter than the wind. Where do you go when your own parents lock the door behind you? That question echoed in my chest as I crossed through the empty neighborhood. The grocery store sign buzzed in the distance. I didn't have money. Didn't have a plan. Just one name that kept surfacing like a prayer. Iris, my grandmother. She lived 2 towns over. I hadn't seen her since Christmas 2 years before. She'd fought with my father and never came back for holidays, but I remembered her voice on the phone. Husky, warm, unshaken. "You're always welcome here, child," she'd told me once. I pulled my coat tighter and kept walking. They erased me like I never existed. By the time I reached the bus station, my feet were soaked through. I had $23 in my pocket, and the name, Iris, scribbled on a diner napkin I'd used to steady my nerves. One transfer and a long ride later, I was standing in front of her little white house with the crooked porch rail and frost clinging to the windows. She opened the door before I knocked. I must have looked like a ghost. Wet hair, red eyes, one hand still on my stomach like I was bracing for the next blow. "I figured it was you," she said, stepping aside. "You're early." She didn't ask questions, didn't make me explain anything, just poured tea into a chipped mug and pointed to the old couch with the quilt folded neatly on the back. "You can stay as long as you need," she said. "That's not a question." For the first few weeks, I barely spoke. I slept too much, ate too little. Iris moved around me like someone tending to a wounded animal, not rushing, not prying, just making sure I didn't forget how to breathe. Then came the doctor's visits, the slow changes in my body, the ache in my back, and the heaviness in my chest. I didn't know if I was more afraid of becoming a mother or becoming invisible. No one from home ever called. Not my mother, not my father, not even my cousins who used to slip me lifesavers during Sunday service. I had disappeared from the family picture entirely. It was as if I had died and no one sent flowers. I gave birth in late August. It was a hot day. My hands were shaking when the contractions started, and I thought I might pass out from the fear alone. But Iris was there. She held my hand through every breath, every cry. When it was over, she placed the baby in my arms, with a reverence I hadn't seen in years. "He's perfect," she whispered. "He's got your chin." I named him Emery, after no one in the family, just a name that felt like it had its own strength. We took him home in a borrowed car seat, wrapped in a blanket Iris had knit during those long afternoons when I couldn't get off the couch. She moved slower by then, but her eyes were still sharp, her hands still steady. One day, when Emery was about 3, Iris sat on the porch with him while I folded laundry inside. I heard him ask, "Why don't I have a grandma like the other kids?" There was a long pause, then Iris said quiet and clear, "Because some people choose silence. But you were never missing anything." I stood in the hallway with a pair of tiny socks in my hand and tears running down my face. They hadn't just rejected me, they had cut me out clean, like I was never part of them to begin with. I didn't get even. I just got busy. I never set out to prove anything. I didn't daydream about showing them. I could make it without them. I was too tired, too broke, and too scared to carry pride around with me. What I carried was a lunch shift at Mel's Diner and a coffee can under the bed with a label in black marker, "Emery's Future." Every tip went in there, every extra quarter, every wrinkled 5. I didn't tell Emery what it was for. Not yet. He just thought the tin sounded funny when he shook it. He grew fast. By the time he was 5, he had a head full of soft curls and eyes that asked more questions than I could keep up with. He wanted to know why clouds moved how bread rose and what made light bulbs glow. He built strange little towers out of toothpicks and asked if airplanes breathed. We didn't have much. Our house had creaky floorboards and the windows iced over in winter, but it had a rhythm. Pancakes on Saturdays, jazz on the radio, and Iris in her rocker with a book that she never seemed to finish. One night when Emery was about 6, he came home from school with a drawing of a family tree. His was mostly empty. "Do I not have real grandparents?" he asked, holding up the paper. I looked at Iris. She set her teacup down, wiped her hands on her apron, and said, "They missed the chance, but you were never missing anything." I watched from the kitchen doorway as Emery nodded and climbed onto her lap, like that answer was enough. Later, when I was scrubbing a pan that didn't need scrubbing, I cried. Not the loud kind, the slow kind, the kind that slides down your face and disappears into the water before anyone sees it. That night, I pulled out the coffee can and counted the crumpled bills again. Still not enough. A few months later, Lance walked into Mel's. He was wearing a suit that didn't match the place-ordered black coffee and didn't speak much. I spilled half the pot on his table when I tripped over a mop bucket and the hot liquid soaked his papers. I stammered, "Apologies." He dabbed at his coat and said, "It's fine. Just bring me something clean to wear." I ran home, dug through Iris's closet, and brought back my grandfather's old corduroy jacket. Lance looked at it like I'd handed him a piece of living history. He laughed, really laughed, and put it on. "You've got guts," he said, "and vintage taste." He came back the next week, sat at the same booth, tipped well, didn't ask questions. The week after that, he brought a book for Emery about dragonflies. Said he'd overheard him talking about wings. Emery took to him faster than I did. One day, he pulled out a drawing of a dragonfly with labeled parts and explained the anatomy like a tiny professor. Lance listened. "Like it mattered, smart kid," he said afterward. "You ever think about science camp?" I shook my head. "I think about paying the electric bill." A week later, he dropped off a flyer and said he'd already covered the tuition. I wanted to say no. I wanted to guard my pride like a fence, but Emery was so excited and Iris just said, "Don't punish the boy because the man's decent. so I let him help. He didn't fix us. He didn't try. He just stayed. And after a while, that mattered more than anything else. He asked to meet the woman who raised me. I didn't expect her to recognize him. By the time Emery turned 35, he had built a life with the same quiet intensity he'd had as a boy. He earned a full scholarship to Johns Hopkins, finished medical school near the top of his class, and spent nearly a decade training to become a surgeon. He never rushed anything. He just kept going. When he finally opened his own clinic in Baltimore, I sent a single card with 2 words: "Proud always." He called me that night, choking up a little, and said I couldn't have done any of this without you. Mom, I didn't say what I was thinking, that he had done most of it on his own, that all I'd done was keep the lights on, feed him, fight for him, and love him even when I had nothing left for myself. Then came the call. It was a Tuesday again. Funny how life circles back. Emery had performed emergency surgery on a woman in her late 60s with a ruptured appendix. The case had been complicated, the timing tight. He stayed late into the night, monitoring her vitals, checking her charts. The woman pulled through. The next day, her husband showed up at the clinic with a tin of homemade cookies and shaky hands. "You saved her," he told Emery, his voice thick. "I can't explain what that means. You saved everything I have left." Emery thanked him politely and tried to leave it at that, but the man lingered. "What's your mother's name?" he asked. Emery blinked Charlotte. The man's eyes changed. He gripped Emery's shoulder and said, "Would you let me thank her in person?" "Please." Emery hesitated. "That's not something I arrange often," he said. "But I'll ask her. He called me that night. There's a man who wants to meet you," he said. "He said I saved his wife. That you're the reason I became the kind of man who could do that." I paused, spoon still in the pot of stew. "What's his name, Tom?" he said. "Tom Weller." I dropped the spoon. Iris was sitting in her rocker across the room. She looked up slowly, met my eyes, and said, "So they finally found the door." 3 days later, they pulled into the driveway in a pickup I hadn't seen in 35 years. It was older now, faded red, the kind of vehicle that sagged slightly on one side. From time, Tom stepped out first, slower, stiffer than I remembered, with a cane and a tremble in his jaw. Linda followed behind, her white cardigan clutched tight around her shoulders. I stood on the porch, hands dusted with flour. I hadn't told Emery everything, not yet. He came outside when he heard the car wiping his hands on a clinic form. He looked at me confused. "Mom?" I nodded toward the truck. "They said they wanted to thank the woman who raised you," I said. Turns out, they already knew her. The couple walked closer. Emery looked from their faces to mine. "Wait, you know them." I swallowed Emery. I said quietly, "Meet your grandparents." Tom stopped short. His cane hit the gravel with a soft thud. His lips parted and his eyes went glassy. "We've missed you," he whispered. "Missed everything." Linda clutched her purse like a life vest. "We were wrong," she said, voice breaking. "We thought we had time to make it right." Emery stood still, his body caught between their faces and mine. The porch was quiet, except for the wind stirring the rose bushes. And for a moment, I didn't know if I should step forward or step back. They said, "Sorry," I told them it wasn't enough. We didn't talk on the porch. I opened the door and let them in because I wasn't going to make a show out of it, not for Emery, not for the neighbors, not even for myself. I just couldn't bear to have them standing out there like strays. Inside, Iris sat in her chair by the window, wrapped in a knitted shawl and holding a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird in her lap. She didn't look up when the door opened. She didn't have to. She always knew when ghosts came through. Tom and Linda stood awkwardly just past the rug, as if afraid the floor might give out beneath them. Lance was already home, standing in the kitchen with a mug in hand. He didn't say much, but his eyes scanned the room like he was ready to step in if anything snapped. I poured tea for everyone. My hands were steady, but my breath wasn't. Tom took the cup with both hands like it might slip from his grip. Linda kept hers in her lap untouched. Emery sat beside me on the couch, eyes darting between us all, trying to read a story he hadn't been given. It was Iris who broke the silence. She lifted her head, her voice dry but clear. "You didn't lose her," she said, eyes on Tom. "You threw her away. You just didn't think she'd grow stronger without you." Tom's mouth opened closed. His eyes brimmed with tears, but he didn't speak. Linda did. We were scared, she said, her voice small. I thought if we kept her under control, we could fix it. But then it got too big, too loud, and your father, well, he made a choice. Iris snapped. And you followed. I stayed quiet, listening to the words bounce off the walls of the home I had built. Not with money, not with forgiveness, but with time and meals and quiet evenings where nothing hurt. Then Linda reached into her purse and pulled out a worn envelope. She held it out to me with both hands. I wrote this years ago, she said. After Emery was born, I never sent it. I was ashamed. I didn't take it. I stared at the soft corners of the envelope, the faded ink of my name. I wanted to, she added, but I thought it wouldn't matter anymore. I finally reached out and took it, but I didn't open it. I placed it on the coffee table next to the sugar bowl and a photo of Emery from high school. The letter could wait. The truth had already arrived. I don't want your guilt, I said finally. Tom looked up at me, his voice rough. Then what do you want? Nothing, I said, because I already have what you thought I'd never have, a son who loves me, a home full of light, a man who stays. Tom's shoulders sagged, his eyes filled again. I think about you every single day, Charlotte. You think about the girl you left, I corrected. You don't know the woman I became. Emery cleared his throat. I have a question, he said carefully. If I forgive them, would that hurt you? I turned to him, surprised. There was so much of me in his face, and yet something gentler, something more generous. I brushed my hand along his arm. No, I said. But don't call them family, not yet. He nodded. They're just people right now, I added. Not enemies, not saints, just people who were wrong. Linda let out a soft sob. Tom sat back in his chair, his hands trembling. I looked at them both and said, without anger, sorry is a beginning, but it doesn't buy a place back at the table. Then I stood up, gathered the empty teacups, and carried them to the sink. The sound of water running filled the room, covering the words that didn't come. Behind me, no one moved. I didn't need them to beg, I just needed them to stop lying. I poured another pot of tea, not because anyone asked for it, just because my hands needed something to do. The steam rose between us like a veil. I didn't speak again. I didn't need to. I had said what mattered. Tom and Linda sat on the edge of their chairs like they didn't know whether to stand or kneel, like they were waiting for a verdict, but there was no judgment left in me, just history. Emery stayed by my side. He didn't say much either, just rested his hand on mine like he'd done when he was 5 and afraid of thunderstorms. Lance moved through the kitchen with quiet steps, wiping down the counter that didn't need cleaning. Iris hadn't said a word since that one sharp sentence, but her eyes never left Tom. Then, as the clock ticked toward dusk, I stood. I'll fix a plate to take, I said, not asking if they wanted it. There's stew and cornbread. Take it or leave it, Linda whispered. Thank you. I nodded but didn't smile. They left with a brown paper bag and silence. On the porch, Tom turned to me. If we ever wanted to come back, someday, would you let us? I met his eyes, familiar and foreign all at once. I don't make promises I can't keep, I said, but I won't pretend anymore either. Not for you, not for anyone. He gave a small nod. No protest, no defense, just regret. Linda didn't look back. Inside the house, settled into its familiar hush. Iris had fallen asleep in her chair, book on her lap. Lance poured the rest of the tea into her cup, just in case she woke and wanted it warm. Emery followed me into the kitchen. He leaned against the counter watching me rinse the mugs. They seemed older than I expected, he said. They are, I replied, but not everything breaks just because it gets old. Some things harden. He was quiet for a moment. Then I'm glad they met you. Finally. I dried my hands and turned to face him. I didn't do this for them. I did it so you'd know the truth, that it wasn't me who left. They told that version for too long. Emery nodded. I know I picked up the envelope Linda had left and tucked it into the drawer by the stove. I wasn't ready to read it. Maybe I never would, but it was proof of something that once. Even if she couldn't say it out loud, she'd wanted to. That night, as the fire in the hearth dimmed and the house folded in on itself like an old quilt, Iris stirred. You know what hurts worse than being forgotten, she said, eyes still closed. What? I asked, soft. Being remembered only when it's convenient. I kissed her forehead. The next morning, I found Emery in the yard, hands deep in the soil where the winter roses used to bloom. He looked up. Spring's late this year. I nodded. It'll come anyway. He smiled, then stood and brushed off his palms. From the porch, I looked out at the quiet street, the same one I'd walked down alone 35 years earlier with a duffel bag and no place to land, and I thought I didn't vanish. They just told the story like I did.